Good afternoon. It's 5 o'clock. It's 5 o'clock on Tuesday, November the 1st. And welcome to this week's What Comes Next Live, where we talk with inspirational leaders about, well, whatever is on their mind and sometimes what comes next. Really pleased to note today that for the 100th show in this series, a little bit of a milestone, my guest is my dear friend Gordon Bull, who I can wave at because he only lives a few miles away. And Gordon and I first met over a decade ago when I joined a business coaching organization called Sherlaws. And it's fair to say we've got to know each other a lot better now that we live about 4 miles apart rather than 4,000 plus miles apart when I lived overseas. That's about enough intro from me. Over to the man with the drinks cabinet behind him. Welcome aboard, Gordon.
Thank you very much. The drinks cabinet is a nice piece, or drinks shelf rather, in as much as that became a thing right at the beginning of COVID when, 1 week, like most people, I'd never heard of Zoom. And a week later, I'm doing everything on Zoom. And on LinkedIn, I think it said it's very important, really important that you have a professional background while you're on your Zoom calls. So I thought, that'll look fine. And if I pardon the pun, as it were, it's gone down a treat ever since. So everybody's response to it normally is, "Oh, can I come around for a drink?" And after a couple of years, we did that. Well, you were there. We had a garden party in August 2021. Where everybody who'd been on a Zoom plus a few others came round, and we certainly had some drinks from the shelf.
In fact, you themed the whole thing with invites and a cocktail maker and everything. Yes. So for the listening audience, I'll describe it in audio. Basically, Gordon's got a cabinet behind him, which is absolutely stocked full of hard liquor. And Stone's ginger wine, I can see. There's all kinds of stuff if I squint. So yes, it was. And that was a great summer event in your back garden. Must have been 60 plus people there, yeah, of widely varying backgrounds. And I remember the person I came with, they said, "What kind of people will be here?" I says, "They're all going to be the same." And as we walked in the garden, I could see that they could relax because nobody wants to be in a homogenous party where everybody's the same. I said, and what they realized was they're all different, but what was all the same about them is they were all business people, entrepreneurs of all kinds of different varieties. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and then what's on your mind? What are you focused on? What are you thinking about?
Okay, so I'm 66. I'm a husband, father, grandfather. Just had another grandchild last week. Youngest daughter, Alice, produced a little girl called Ruby and Diana after my wife, which is delightful. So that's our 8th grandchild. I'm still paying my subscription to the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England. I know Tom always thinks that's the second rate Institute of Chartered Accountants after the Scottish Institute.
You just weren't the first.
Oh, I thought it was a rating thing rather than the historical.
No, we were just the first. We were just the first out there.
Okay. So I'm still paying my subscription to the Institute, but these days I very much focus on my business coaching. As Tom said, we met at a business which I'm very grateful for still, which is Sherlaws, and taught me so much, and I still learn stuff every day within the frameworks and tools of that. I learn a lot from you as well, Tom, which is great. So I sort of switched from being chartered accountant come consultant when I was about early 50s, I suppose, into somebody who was much more interrogative and just looking to learn about other people's stories, other people's situations, and really how people make decisions, myself included. And that to me is, you said in the prompt or the layout for today, it's very much around what's occupying you mostly. And mostly what I am being occupied right now is my almost obsessive interest now in how people make decisions. And that could be a decision about, do we fly to Hong Kong to see our new grandchild? That's not me, by the way, that's somebody else. How do I choose which shirt to wear today? What drinks to put on the shelf behind me, as you nicely described? All of those things, tiny little decisions every day, and how conscious people are, because I'm just staggered. I live in the borough of Croydon, which I think Tom does too. He's only 4 miles away. So are you London Borough of Croydon?
Yes, we're the southernmost part of Greater London. Yeah.
So Tom's in the very posh part. And we're in the sort of middling posh part of Croydon. Anyway, Croydon Council over the last few years have made some of the most appalling decisions around how to run things in the borough, to the tune of losses that central government had to bail out. So Croydon Council went bust, and they went bust to the tune of £600 million. We're a borough of 400,000 people, which is bigger than most people's towns in England. If it was a city, I think it might be, I don't know, the 10th or 12th biggest place in Britain. But we've gone bust to the tune of 600 million. And I know vaguely, I've met them a few times, the people who were responsible for that. And at some level, they're nice people, and up to a point they're intelligent. And the finance guy is a chartered accountant, but their behavior, their decisions were somewhere between willfully neglectful and just utterly stupid. And we've, 400,000 people have lost £600 million, and the government bailed us out. And me and my kids live locally, 2 of my kids live locally, and all the other local schools and services. And Tom and I both know a very good client, Susanette, locally, who runs a charity in Croydon, who've had their funding cut massively. And it's just how I'd love to know how those decisions got made. If you add to that the Tory party circus that's gone on this year with electing a leader and selecting a leader, and again the decisions they make around who they appoint, and even when they stand on the steps of number 10, and how they choose the words they're going to deploy. Obviously, they have script writers and advisors and PR consultants and all that. But at the end of the day, they choose the words and they choose the emphasis. And really, that's what's occupying me, Tom, is how on earth are people managing to make some decisions that, in quotes, a number of people, certainly in my bubble, go, how on earth did you make that choice? Staggering. So that's everywhere I look. And, the old Chinese curse of may you live in interesting times. I don't watch soap operas as such, but I listen to the oldest or longest running soap opera, The Archers. But the world is a fantastic soap opera right now. And everywhere you look, there's fascination, whether it be Lulu and Bolsonaro in Brazil, the women in Iran rioting, the death of China and its population predictions. Hong Kong, friends have just flown out to Hong Kong, and that is a very locked down state and fascinating. China's attitude to Taiwan, the weather in Australia, which is positively biblical. You talk about the Cayman weather, having been out there to see our son back earlier in the year when the rain then was biblical, and it is still biblical down the East Coast and in Victoria, in Melbourne. It's bizarre. Everywhere you look, I find fascinating about decisions made, how they're made, even to the point where with some friends called in today, they live in France and they're going through to Cambridge to see her mother. Anyway, they're from our house, which is at 6 o'clock on the M25 around London. We live at about the 6 o'clock mark down the bottom. So they will go up to Cambridge via the Dartford tunnel and bridge. And when, of course, we joked, well, so long as there's nobody stuck themselves to the bridge. And, there's a lot of that about Stop Oil. And how do people decide to stick themselves to a bridge like 200 feet up on that bridge? I mean, I'm fascinated about, and also, how do you do it? And how do you
technically, how do you do it?
Technically, how do you do it? And how do the rescuers, whoever they are, how do they unstick them? And I don't know. It's just fascinating. Yeah, how did those? But yeah, I know what we'll do. We'll put ourselves 200 feet up on the Dartford Bridge. Really?
Well, there's but apart from a lot of very international, global current affairs things you referenced there's at least half a dozen very British references in there. So for the international audience, you've got some things you can Google. What I'd say is broadly that the orbital motorway of London, at about the 3 o'clock on the clock, it crosses the Thames River, where it's a wide estuary, and there's something called the Dartford Crossing there that they go over. And there's some Just Stop Oil protesters who, among other things, are gluing their hands with super glue to various things to deliberately cause disruption. So, like, what's going through their mind, what's their thinking, etc. And I think it's something that just came up just yesterday. I was on a thing. Another past podcast guest, Rob Poynton, runs a quite holistic small group learning program called Yellow Learning. And so it's a very unusual learning experience. We were on a group call yesterday, and they took us through an example. I'm writing about it in my blog in a couple of days about, being the director of the movie of your life and taking you through the movie making. It did also make me think of a very dear friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours, Ed Percival, who is my greatest mentor in life. And Ed used to run some training, which also involves some of this around presentation skills. And his analogy was, always go to the point of greatest emotion in a movie. And his analogy was, or his adage was, there I stood on the burning bridge. So if you're actually telling the story of a boat crossing the Atlantic, you don't start with acquiring the boat and filling it full of provisions. You start at the point at which it looks like it's going to sink, and then people get interested. And what they were talking about last night, which fascinated me, was if you were to think about the story of your life, the bit that creates interest is moments of dilemma, right? And a dilemma is not interesting if it's a really obvious choice. But if you're choosing between two evils, Sophie's Choice was a movie on that, or if you're choosing between two good solutions, but you can't make your mind up, that makes an interesting dilemma. And what was interesting to me was those decision points. What causes people to make decisions? So I think there's two things in there. One is, how do people decide? What informs their choice? And the second one is, is around, what has them make the choice? So it's slightly, there's one is the how is the process. The other is the more like the why they do it. Leaping to one answer is, I'm aware that before the last election in the UK, it was pretty obvious to the people running the Tory campaign that they were going to get a landslide way before it was publicly obvious. But one of the reasons why is they invested massive amounts of money, I have no idea where from, under election campaign finance rules, but massive amounts of money to actually literally running focus groups and polling on a daily basis in a really highly organized way, so that by the middle of the day, they could create the talking points for whichever talking heads were going on the evening news. So they were, everything was hyper-analyzed. Every word coming out of people's mouths was hyper-analyzed to the nth degree. And so I think my gut feel is that it reminds me of when the world came crashing down in 2008, when basically the book about Enron, for example, was called The Smartest Guys in the Room. And people are just getting too smart for themselves. And perhaps we could just actually, we overcomplicate things before making decisions. And I think perhaps that work in the city might have actually gone into the world of politics and making decisions that impact people's lives day to day. Right? And it's just a thought. It's like, what if we just simplified, why are we here? When's the last time when they had the latest prime minister in the soap opera appointed by the MPs, one of the most passionate speeches by one of them the next day, which is quite a well put together little rant. But what he was interested in was the party. At no point was he interested in the people of the country. I think they sometimes on all sides they forget who they're there to serve, and they've overcomplicated it.
Well, of course, you and I know that the best way to simplify things is just go up a notch contextually.
Yeah.
And where I've, again, become a little bit maybe like a broken record on this, most of my clients' work starts with old and new paradigm stuff. And I was listening to a really good comedy program on Radio 4. I listen to Radio 4 a lot, certainly in the evenings. And they have a comedy slot between 6:30 and 7 most nights. And at the moment, there's one on a Monday called It's a Fair Cop. And it's a policeman turned comedian who basically involves his audience of 200 people in the studio as policemen. And then he runs through one of his experiences of policing in Scunthorpe. And what came out of last night's one, which is very funny, the way he puts some very difficult judgments he has to make as a policeman on the beat. But the point about this around old and new paradigm was the targets that they were given for arrests and successful prosecutions under all the various headings of domestic abuse, motoring offences, pure theft, break-ins, whatever it was. That is what drove their judgment when they were making their choices on the street and when trying to apprehend and prevent crimes happening. And it was entirely driven in that fear-based outcome stuff we talk about in old paradigm, that they'd lost sight of their policing job of keeping the community safe. And they were entirely working towards delivering on their targets, which hadn't been set by them. They'd been set by the regional police force and then handed out geographically to various forces within Humberside, which, as he points out, is actually a statutory area that doesn't exist anymore, but they still have police forces within it. And that, to me, was just my goodness me, that's outcome-driven stuff. And so much of it, so many of the decisions now, for whatever reason, seem to be outcome-driven and therefore fearful. But they tend to be short-term. They tend to be, as I say, very complicated then. Who are we trying to appease? Who are we trying to please? What's this going to look like to other people? What's it going to look like to me at my appraisal? So you can throw the kitchen sink at the whole thing of making what should be a relative... No, you're supposed to be looking after the public and prosecuting the law out there on the beat. That's it. You don't have to worry about what your boss is going to say or what the commissioners in your area are going to say. But they lose sight of that. Like, we've allowed life to become very complicated, as you say, and then you throw all that in, and I suppose, yeah, that's why you get some decisions that you look at them afterwards, you go, really? How did you? And at that moment, it was a fear-based decision. And part of that, well, something else I'm very, keen on at the moment is emotional intelligence. A good friend of mine, Lisa Allen with Islander, she's putting emotional intelligence training into schools, which I think is massively admirable, and want to support her on that. Just because, yeah, life's complicated enough for children, and she's doing this for teachers of primary age children, just to try and get ahead of the complexity of life and just give people the confidence to make some simplified decisions. Contextually, trust your emotions, because they're probably there for a reason. Trust your emotions, but know how to use your emotional intelligence. Develop your emotional intelligence and then be able to use it. And that way, you might well end up with some better decisions on whatever it might be.
To just recap a couple of those thoughts. When you and I are talking about old and new paradigm, really another way of framing that is old paradigm is decisions based on fear.
Yeah.
New paradigm is decisions based on trust and abundance, effectively.
Yeah.
And what I'm it's an interesting perspective that for me sits within what you said, is that when we make short-term, reactive, getting lost in the detail decisions, like you need another 10 arrests in this category in Scunthorpe, it's often fear-based. Whereas if you just go, look, we're here to keep the public safe, and they need to trust the police, right? Yeah. It's like, well, okay. So, and another thing you were talking about is this distinction between, again, raising the context, is doing the source activity that will then generate the outcomes. Yeah. And both you and I love business, and we often love to focus on that within this context of leadership and decision making. And, often we get really, I mean, we're going to be entering into a very deep recession for quite a very, very tough period of time in the UK and many economies around the world. And if you're in business, it's going to be really hard. And one of the things is going to be, okay, what do we focus on? Because it's going to be exhausting. I mean, because you're going to have to focus on keeping the wolf in the door, having cash in the bank for payroll every month, etc. But also, like, why are we here? What are we here to do? All of that stuff needs to be looked at, because it's really exhausting to operate from fear. Now, we all do it from time to time. But if instead we go like, okay, why are we here? What are we brilliant at? What do we need to focus on? And we saw this, we don't have to look back very far. We saw this a lot. A lot of the egos and personalities went out the window as soon as the COVID hit in March 2020. And I really, to be honest, on a professional level, I really enjoyed the next few months, because all of the egos dropped away and people went, what do I need to do? What decisions do I need to make? What do I need to focus on? And, some of my podcast guests have talked about that. And, one of them who led one of the big accounting firms in Canada, Pat Kramer, just really said, well, we just focused on our people. That's it. Everything was about supporting our people. Right? And that's a fairly common thread there. And when you have that, one of my adages is, which I actually wrote about in today's blog at a level, is if you get clear on the why, the how is easy, Yeah. So how do we, to be honest, for me, it often baffles me is that why don't people think about the why? Because the catchphrase used by somebody else that I put in the blog was, short term easy, short term is easy, but it leads to a hard life, right? Long-term decision making is hard, but leads to an easy life.
Isn't that's sort of paraphrasing a little bit? Is it the SAS or the paratroopers or whoever have that train hard and fight easy, or something like that?
Well, I don't know, but what I did reference was in athletics or in any kind of sport or not, Americans. I don't mean athletics as in track and field, but in any kind of athletic endeavor. And I was a pretty decent athlete myself, and my sons were, and I worked with pro cycling teams and other professional athletes. A two-time guest on the show, my first guest is Mark Beaumont, who's an elite athlete, a round-the-world cyclist. And in sports, it's hard. You train really hard, and it's to go better or faster or whatever. It's harder and harder to a certain point. But when you get to an elite level, you have to go easy to go better. And if you think about whether it's football or a rugby player making an amazing move, or a tennis player or a squash player doing something quite stunning, or a Formula One driver making a pass, the time slows down and they get into a state of what's called flow. So yeah, it's like they don't have to make decisions at that point, because they've done all the source activity.
So just going back a little bit on what you said there about the beginning of lockdown, March 2020, and I would echo that piece that ego went a little bit out of the door because people, somewhere between panic and anger, was the emotion going around the place. And the language now we've got from our leader, well, our last leaders have been very much, we're going to have to make some hard choices. So the language is already out there. This is a difficult time. And you said it's going to be, we're in recession, it's going to be hard. Yes, but my but is that, like with the beginning of COVID, there's a stack of opportunities. If you can actually just raise your head above the parapet a little bit, get your head clear, and actually work contextually about, as you said, at source, what are we good at? What can we do? What's the skill set? What are the resources we've got? The world's still going to spin. There's still going to be consumption and spending, and there's still going to be need for innovation and supply of whatever it might be. I don't know. But there is a ton of opportunity there. And so long as we convince ourselves it's going to be hard, you know what it's like, it will be hard.
That's true.
But, if we actually just do the bit of contextually, and as you said, why am I even in business? And I had that conversation with a number of clients early on, and I've had a couple lately. If things are bad, just pack it in.
Yeah.
And a lot of clients will go, I can't stop. This is my life. Well, all the numbers show it's not great. And then when you look at what might be coming around the corner, it's not going to get much better for you. And there was a big word, wasn't there, early in the recession, in the lockdown, about pivoting, wasn't there? The big stuff around, yeah, well, what have you got? What can you do? What's your skill set? Who do you know? What are the assets in your business? And just have a bit of a rethink. You don't have to keep banging your head against this brick wall, particularly as this brick wall may be getting thicker and bigger. So let's go and find another brick wall or so.
So I think if I, we're talking about decision making today, is what's on your mind. And one of the things that is top of mind for me right now is delaying decisions. And somebody was asking me, so why do people do that? And I went, I'm not the right person to ask, because anybody who knows me knows that I'm not introspected and analyzed this, but I'm not somebody who delays decisions. Once I have the facts, if anything, I hope I'm not like this anymore, but if anything, at times I've made decisions too fast out of sometimes fear of not making a decision. But actually, why there is nothing, we'll often regret not making a decision early enough. We rarely regret making a decision early later on. There are a lot of things we hold on to, and business people, their businesses, they're small business owners, their business is their baby, and they hate to be a failure. But we've got mutual friends that you introduced me to, Paul Bailey and Tom Ahmad, who are two amazing guys in our region of South London, who their why, and we both worked with them. I remember going for a long walk with them when that was all you're allowed to do during the pandemic. And it became really clear their why is simple. It's to help business. And they're insolvency practitioners. So, the public perception might be they're just there to wind things up. But they really, really would love, and they do a lot of this, try to talk to people, business owners, earlier at the time. So, I'm actually having lunch with them in a couple of days. They're actually, I imagine, in their element right now, because not because their business will be full of people going insolvent, which, to be honest, it's going to be quite busy for them the next couple of years, but really because they have the opportunity to live their why and get out there and talk to people about what's going on in your business. Here are some options available to you. Here's what you could do, and make the decision at the right time, not delay it or go too early, for example.
But that's a really good point, Tom, and it kind of it might be a good way to sort of move towards the end of this, i.e. that just the best question you can ever ask is why. Why am I doing this? Why am I going into work? Why am I being a plumber or a lawyer or whatever it is? Why am I doing this? Just check in. It's worth checking in with your why and see how robust it is. And possibly, it probably won't change much, but it's actually, I think a lot of people have lost sight of their why. What is their purpose? Why are you on the planet? And if you can connect with that why, as you and I both know, and my clients know too, when they've connected with it, it just makes the world a better place. And it removes that anxiety. And you say fear, living in a fear space or even a not source space is absolutely exhausting.
Yeah.
Whereas if you can live in that wonderful, inspiring, I get why I'm here. I get, like you say, with Tom and Paul, you say, we're just here to help business. And they have delightful lives as a result of it.
And the funny thing is, I remember that inflection point. I remember that moment. Right, walking with them when it just popped out of one of their mouths, and I just got goosebumps, and I went, "That's it." And I think one of the recommendations is both of us have a why that's kind of similar to that, so we have to live that through our work, and if people like you and I professionally are really good at listening for that from people and asking the questions and being curious and helping to work that out. So there's going to be change, there's going to be challenge, and in every challenge there is an opportunity, right? So, or sometimes more than one. So a recommendation that comes to me to say is that find somebody who can help you get to that why easier and faster than you can on your own.
Yeah.
And if that's a coach like Gordon Bull or Tom McCallum or somebody else like that in your area, or that you feel is a fit for you, just go talk to them. You know, if I know I'm speaking for you and speaking for me, I'm very happy to jump on a Zoom call with people, or to,
Yeah.
you know, they don't have to say, oh, what's it going to cost? Where's a client or whatever, but happy to have lunch with people, coffee, whatever, and just do that. And sometimes in one conversation, it pops out. Or at least it gets them closer. And that to me energizes me.
Have the conversation. And quite often when I've spoken to people, look, the best people I have to ask actually might well be your mum and dad,
Yeah.
or your brother, your sister, or
Yeah.
your business partner of 10 years. And just start a conversation, put yourself on that questioning mode, and just ask other people what they see in you. And a lot of people, oh, you can't ask that. Well, yes, you can. Just say, when you're seeing somebody else, what do you say about me? What do you find yourself saying about me when you're out and about? And that will give them that feedback a little bit. And generally speaking, people are much better than they ever think they are. Other people have a higher opinion of them than they have of themselves.
I totally agree, and I'll just give people a tip on this, which I give to many people in this position, and I'll be very specific about it. I'll say to them, find 10 to 12 people who are cross-section of your friends, family, and work colleagues, but they need to know you well, whether it's from childhood or whether it's from now. Send them an email, and the email needs to say exactly this. I'm working with a coach. They've asked me to ask a number of people to tell me about myself.
Yeah. Perfect.
And say that's it. Literally 2 sentences. Now, the reason for saying you're working with a coach is because that is to stop them asking questions about why you're asking. It gives them somebody to pin it on. And if they say, well, what am I supposed to write? How much am I supposed to write? It says, that's my instruction from the coach, is tell me about myself. And I'll tell them that some people will not reply. Some people will ask 10 questions. And you just keep repeating back the one-line instruction. And some people will immediately send you back 3 pages on an email. Some people will send you 3 bullet points, because we all have different processing styles. And the advice then on the exercise is print all of those out on paper and get some highlighter pens in different colors and highlight the words and phrases that ring true for you.
So you can do a word cloud kind of thing, can't you?
You can do a word cloud. You can use a word cloud app or something. Yeah. And it says, and when you've done that, give me a call.
Yeah, perfect.
And it might take you 2 or 3 weeks. And it's a very cool exercise. And what I'll finish with on that for myself, then I'll throw over to you to wrap up for us, is that, echoing your point about childhood and parents and brothers and siblings, for example, is that when we're at our most innocent, like you mentioned your friend Lisa, who's working with primary schools, when you're at that age, primary 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, that typically is when you're formed enough as a human to still be, you're not shy to do whatever, right? But you're pretty clear on who you are. And there's a video which is tough to find, but is out there somewhere, of Oprah Winfrey interviewing Sheryl Sandberg for about 45 minutes. And what was really stunning about it was the why of both of these amazing women came straight out. And Sandberg, despite her formal roles, is all about empowering women, her own way of doing it. And what was fascinating about Oprah was that she realized at the age of 3 why she was on this planet. And she's never varied from it.
Yeah. And if you can get that, it is kind of the sunny uplands. It gives you the clarity, gives you the energy around how you make decisions. So, no, I think that's a nice way to finish it, Tom.
What's your why, Gordon?
Is to heal the world.
There you go. And with that...
and on that bombshell.
Do you have some final bon mots, some words of wisdom for our audience, Mr. Bull?
What they would be around get in touch with your feelings, get in touch with your emotional intelligence, create some emotional intelligence. There's a ton of it out there on the web. My friend Lisa Islander, she'd be happy to talk to anybody. But it's really, that's the way I think that will heal the world, if more people can have a greater sense of their emotional intelligence. And a big part of that, like you said earlier, opposite the fear space, is just trust your own emotions, but you need to trust your processing of your emotions. And once you can do that more, you have emotional intelligence, and then you'll make better decisions all day, every day.
Thank you very much, Gordon Bull. That was
Pleasure.
an inspiring conversation from a leader I greatly admire. Thank you, sir. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Tom.